Hi, this is your Chapter 16 mini lecture on organizational culture. Here are the learning outcomes for this chapter. Please feel free to pause here and read through these if you feel. First, we're going to look at the three levels of organizational culture and evaluate the roles they play in an organization. So the first things that we have are our artifacts. The way people act, our ceremonies, our stories, our rituals, our symbols. These are very visible. And these are some of the, really the things that people can see and hear within an organization. So they are often the most visible. Then we have our values, and we've talked about having, a code of ethics, and really how we have people know our code of ethics and know our values. And so people are aware of the values of an organization, but it's not as clear as these artifacts. And then there are the basic assumptions. So it's the relationship to the environment, the nature of our reality, our time, and our space, human nature, our activities, our relationships. And a lot of these are things that we can't see and they're invisible, but they make up a huge part of our organizational culture. So these are the hardest ones to measure and to really understand. Next, we're going to identify the four functions of culture within an organization. So the first is providing a sense of identity to members and increasing their commitment to the organization. So we want to have a very clear organizational culture so that our members really understand um, the organization and are committed to it. We want to offer a way for employees to make meeting of organizational events. Um, Having an organizational culture reinforces values of an organization and then serving as a control mechanism for shaping behavior. So, what is the relationship between organizational culture and performance? Well, a strong culture is an organizational culture that has a lot of consensus or agreement on the values that drive a company. And this helps with performance because people understand the goals and there's goal alignment, and which creates a high level of motivation, and it allows you to provide some control without really being really bureaucratic or dictating. Culture is good only if it fits within the firm's strategy or within industry norms. So, a firm's culture is going to be impacted by the industry that they partake in. It could be impacted by whether it's manufacturing or sales. And I think you can see that because those things are they're very different types of businesses. It's going to be impacted by the competitive environment, by the types of customers it serves, and the societal expectations. An adaptive culture is one which encourages confidence and risk taking and has leadership that is trying to make change and focuses on the changing needs of customers. And a lot of companies are constantly trying to adapt and change for changing times, as we've seen very recently with the pandemic. And so this also is going to impact culture. I'm sure many of you have seen changes in your organizational culture just from people working at home. I know I have, and I know that the expectation of how many time, days per week people come into work has changed. All right. So next, we're going to look at ways leaders reinforce organizational culture. So leaders play a really big role in determining the organizational culture, and this is done by because followers or people within the organization take notice of what leaders pay attention to, how they react to crisis situations, how they behave, how rewards are given out, and how people are hired and let go of within an organization. Let's talk about how managers assess their organizational culture. So we know everybody has some sort of a organizational culture, but how do we assess this and how do we take an inventory of it? So what we're trying to do is focus on behaviors that help employees fit into an organization and meet our expectations. Sometimes we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to measure this, which I believe we've talked about. We can use the Kilman-Saxton Culture Gap Survey, which focuses on what happens in the organization and the expectations of others. There's some underlying dimensions here. There's the technical human orientation and then short-term versus long-term perspective. We can look at areas in which operating and ideal norms are assessed. We can look at innovation, supportive tasks, social relationships, personal freedom within an organization. And what this does is it provides an individual assessment of a culture, and this can also be done with a work group. Triangulation is something you may hear in the workplace. It does not just apply to organizational culture. Triangulation is when you use multiple methods to measure organizational culture or to measure anything. And so in this case, you might observe people, you might ask them questionnaires, you might do interviews to get different perspectives on what they perceive as the organizational culture to be like. And is that in line with what management and leaders want it to be? Next, we're going to look at actions managers can take to change organizational culture. So sometimes we need to change our culture. Like maybe it's just people are very negative or whatever it might be. So in this case, you have to identify that you need to change behavior. You need to have a reason to do it because it's actually very hard to do. Next, you want to communicate that you're trying to change things. This can be done by hiring people who will help to facilitate that change or have those characteristics you're looking for, which is going to not only with your communications and a change in leadership style and people um, leading, but also by hiring people and actually letting go of those who do not fit within the the way you're trying to change culture. Next we'll look at identifying challenges organizations face when trying to develop really positive and cohesive culture. So these are sort of some situations where that can be a problem. If a company or two companies are merging or one is acquiring another, you now have two companies that are coming together and they have different cultures. And so it can be really hard to mesh those two together to create a new positive and cohesive culture. Having this positive cohesive culture can also be hard in global organizations because we know that different cultures in general around the world, from country to country or population to population or area to area, whatever it might be, are all very different. And so you're going to have different cultural norms based on geographically where you're situated. You have to look at the ethics of your organizational culture and how that plays in, and then how people are empowered and quality initiatives. So that is a very short mini lecture on chapter 16. If you have any questions, please